Hey, I'm Will Payne with SMBW. I'm the technical director here, and I'm here talking with Josh Bearman about greenspace, specifically here in Richmond. So, hi, Josh.
Hello.
Great to have you here. Why don't you start just describing the organization you're with, Blue Sky Fund, and what it does for the city of Richmond?
Sure. So the Blue Sky Fund, and I'm the programs director of the Blue Sky Fund. We run place-based learning with students mostly in, but not entirely in Richmond Public Schools, in and around Richmond Public Schools for students between the ages of, well, third grade and 12th grade. So I guess roughly between 8 and 18. Our mission is that we provide transformational experiences in the outdoors with Richmond students. And transformational experience can mean any number of things. It could be kind of more focused on the educational aspects, science education specifically, or it could be more focused on hard skills. Like with our middle schoolers, we take them biking, we take them hiking, we take them climbing, things of that nature. Or it could be focused on personal resilience, or it could really just be focused on having a positive time, like having fun in the outdoors. And a big part of that mission is really getting to work with as many students who aren't a part of the kind of outdoor recreation scene already. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah. So, could you dive a little further into some of the specific programs that you guys do?
I absolutely can. Yeah, our largest, our most robust program is our Elementary Explorers program. And with that, we partner with Richmond Public Schools. We work with third and fourth and fifth graders at 12 of Richmond's 26 elementary schools. And we take every student out. So every third grader, every fourth grader, every fifth grader, they come out multiple times. Third graders will come out with us 4 times in a year, and then fourth and fifth graders 5 times each. So if you're a student at one of those schools, over the course of 3 years, you will have 14 Blue Sky Fund field experiences. And we work kind of hand in hand with the science curriculum specialists in Richmond Public Schools and the teachers to make sure that our programming is kind of tangential to where they currently are in their pacing. So if they're studying rocks, we're going to try to focus on rocks. If they're studying ecology and more kind of biology type things, we're going to focus on that. And on a day, we handle all the transportation. So we pick the kids up. We either do it ourselves with some buses that we have, or we have partners that do it. We take them to mostly local sites. We try to really highlight parks within the city of Richmond, specifically places that kids can go, students and their caregivers could go for free at another time. But we do go as far out as York River State Park or Pocahontas State Park. And we take the students there. They get off the bus. We do a little bit of intro. We split them into different groups because depending on the school, an entire grade level could be anywhere from 30 kids to 110 kids. So we have multiple teams, and we run them through a series of activities, some more focused on kind of science data collection, some of them more focused on playing a game together and having to learn how to work together and learn how to kind of, well, we call it coping strategies, but how to fail at something, but then get back to do it again. And then we always have just a kind of a nature appreciation, kind of meditative hike associated with it. And we eat lunch, and then we put them back on the bus and we say goodbye, send them back there. And we do that 4 days a week between early September all the way into a few weeks before state testing starts. So it's pretty full thing. So that's our Explorers program. And we'll see roughly 1,800 kids over the course of a year, multiple times. Our middle school program is called OAC, the Outdoor Adventure Clubs, and that takes place in the after-school space. And there it's more focused on what we would call the adventure. So smaller groups of kids go out and they can decide, they'll get exposed to a few different outdoor activities, and then the students over the course of a 10-week session, roughly, can decide we want to focus on hiking, we want to focus on biking, whichever it is, and then they'll get a kind of a deeper dive there. But again, with all the hard skills, it really is most like our number one priority is that they have a positive association and ideally start to feel like a sense of belonging in these spaces. And then our high school group is the Outdoor Leadership Institute, and we recruit from the whole Richmond area through 12th graders. And those students, with summer right now, when you and I are talking, and so this is when that program starts. It starts with a 2-week kind of course. They start in town doing about 4 days of getting to know one another, playing some team building games, also learning how to pack a pack, how to set up a tent, how to hike with a pack. And then they'll go out to Mount Rogers in far Southwest Virginia for 5 days and camp. And then they come back to town, clean up the gear. And then throughout the course of the year, we have multiple opportunities monthly for them to engage in service projects and kind of also to meet with people to learn about career pathways.
Yeah. So what kind of service projects?
It depends. We partner with other community organizations. So they could be at the local botanical gardens planting, or we've done a lot of planting. We partner with our local schools. They've done some kind of cleanup and painting projects at one of our local elementary schools, helping to pack shoes for an organization called Souls to Souls. It could be any number of different things.
Okay.
And sometimes it's more focused on the learning than the service. So for example, they went to the Black History Museum and got kind of a really in-depth tour there. And they got to talk to the curator about how that person ended up in their role. And that was really more of a learning day than a service day necessarily.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting to me in that you're taking the outdoor experience and spinning it back into how the students can give back in a different way and not necessarily in the outdoors specifically, but you're using that as a medium to think about things in a different way, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like to say there's a lot of groups similar to us who do outdoor experiences in and around Richmond and in and around the entire nation anyway. What I feel like separates Blue Sky Fund from some of them anyway is that we are not focused on the environment. We're focused on the student and the student's experience. So while it does happen in the outdoors, and we do want for students to have that positive association at the end of the day, especially as they get older, it's really more about them as individuals and help and facilitating growth wherever possible.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about your role specifically at Blue Sky.
Sure. So I am the programs director. So each of those programs I just described has a manager, and I don't want to say over top of them, but I'm their direct supervisor. So we meet weekly to kind of go through what needs to get done. So for example, with the elementary school program, we need to schedule all of the dates. We need to maintain contact with all of our partners at all of these different locations. But we also need to write and update the lesson plans. We need to order the materials, assemble the kits, and then we need to train our educators and also come up with kind of an arc of training for our educators so that over the course of the year, they are kind of building up their own skills as education professionals. And I come from the world of education. Prior to Blue Sky Fund, I worked for Richmond Public Schools as a middle school teacher, and then I was in the central office as the science curriculum lead. So I have some experience both with traditional classroom learning, but then also with adult learning.
Yeah.
So I try to bring that to the fore when working with my managers. And so it's very similar with the manager of the middle school program, although the lesson plans that they produce are more focused on skills than they are on SOLs or the standards of learning, which is great. Besides that, I get to kind of generate new partnerships and kind of foster the partnerships that we currently have, which has been really fun, reaching out to people that I've met over my time in Richmond in both the outdoor learning and science scene as well as the art scene. So we've been partnering with a sculpture professor at VCU who's doing these adventure playgrounds around town, which has been really fun.
Okay.
And then
So sculpture as like something for kids to interact with.
Right. And this idea that many playgrounds are very kind of overmanaged when it comes to safety, and I say students, but people and younger people should be given the opportunity to kind of manage their own risk. So a lot of these adventure playgrounds exist mostly in Europe and in Asia, where litigation is not as common. So students or children will be in this space, and this space might be just like there might be a mud pit and some tools and some lumber. In some cases, there's fire involved with it and pallets and things like that. And there's for making or doing whatever they want to do with it, honestly. And oftentimes these these adventure playgrounds will have, they're basically fenced in, and there'll be play workers there, but parents are not allowed to come in, because children act differently when their parents are watching them than otherwise, right? So we partnered with this person, Corin Hewitt, where he did a few kind of play actions around town, and we helped to recruit students. And I see that as kind of an interesting extension of Blue Sky's work, which has mostly been focused on the natural world, but this is really more focused on kind of contextualization of the urban world. Because in some cases they're actually using kind of refuse from building sites that the kids are then taking and messing with.
And it's potentially spaces that they're very familiar with, and giving them an opportunity to rethink what it could be how it could be used.
Absolutely. And all the materials too, and what they're for, and then just kind of noticing materials in a different way.
So to branch off of that a little bit, could you talk about different spaces that Blue Sky does utilize?
So we are big users of the James River Park system, which runs right through downtown Richmond, Belle Isle, but Pony Pasture as well, and on the North Bank, the various smaller areas there. We also use Bryant Park and Bird Park and Dogwood Dell, all of these very kind of traditional park spaces. But especially with the middle school program, they go all over. I mean, I think last year we hit over 50 different locations in Richmond, because they can really do what they are doing from anywhere that the students happen to want to do it. So it could be that they're taking a neighborhood walk, right? Like some of our schools are located very much in the city, and so you don't actually have to leave. You don't have to get on a bus to have an experience around there. You can take a walk and notice the ecology of the urban setting just as well, or take a bike ride there too. We also use the Cap Trail for our biking a fair amount, and Great Shiplock Park down there as well. And hopefully soon we'll be using the new James River Association river space, which looks really cool.
So I'm excited about that space too.
One thing that we also have been doing with our elementary schools is that our first trip actually takes place on school grounds, which in some cases the schools have green space, although mostly it's mowed field space. And in some cases they don't have much green space. They just have the sidewalk and maybe some
maybe some asphalt play or something.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that we are working to do, and this is a big movement in kind of place-based learning in urban settings in general, is to demystify the idea of the outdoors and get away from the idea that the environment is something that you travel to, but in fact the environment is something that you have in your front stoop. It's in your schoolyard. It's wherever it happen to be is the environment, and you're in it already. So helping students to kind of uncover whatever secrets there happen to be in their more kind of banal spaces, I guess.
And I think adjacent to that, I read a book in graduate school that was all about the space between buildings. So it was an architectural book, but it was all about the spaces created by the architecture around us.
The accidental, the negative space of architecture in some ways.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's the negative space. It's whether it's a street or a pocket park or something like that. It's negative space. It's public space, semi-public space. And those kinds of spaces have always really fascinated me, sometimes more than the buildings themselves, because, long term, these are the spaces that are most impactful to a community.
And they're always there. Richmond specifically, there's recently been a lot of coverage of the heat islands. And a lot of them located in the East End, where we're located in the East End, although we work with schools around the whole city. And so we're able to do things with students where we'll take them to the parks, but we have little handheld digital laser thermometers, and then they can go back to their school and they can do it there, or they can, on the next day, they can take a trip somewhere else, and just to not only kind of experience these different places, but dive a little bit into some of the social constructs around them and what the effects of those social constructs are. We're not trying to radicalize anyone necessarily, but we do like for people to see the whole picture.
So to zoom out a little bit, when I say the phrase urban green space, what does that make you think of?
Well, so all of the things Richmond is somewhat unique as a city in just the amount of of what we might consider more traditional green space that we have all of these parks,
Right.
tons of, we have a large amount of acreage that is dedicated to that green space.
Yeah.
And so certainly all of those parks are included in there, but then there's all of this other less formal space, schoolyards, but even so, for example, we're moving into a new office, and that office is right where two streets kind of come to a bit of a triangle, and the tip of that triangle is green.
Open.
It's open and green, and it's got some seating and things like that. So that's another example. I think alleyways are an example of urban green space.
Yep.
There's me. I'm personally more interested in those informal spaces because I kind of want to read this book you're talking about because that's how I feel too.
Yeah.
That's what the average citizen is experiencing on a regular basis, and I think it's important for it to be recognized for what it is. And it's also obviously, I think it's important for everyone to get to these more traditionally beautiful kind of spaces where you can see all kinds of wildlife and kind of breathe that nice tree-y air. Yeah, to me, all of that is included in urban green space. And I think it's important for the city to grab it and maybe kind of formalize it a little bit, like having pocket parks, things of that nature. But, in Richmond, one of the places that I really used to love, and I still like it very much, but on the south side of the Teapot Bridge, which is now this kind of more formal park with some art and things like that. I lived in Manchester, that neighborhood, for a long time, and I would run down there. And prior to that all being built up, it was still green space, but it was like, this is a spot that's below a bridge and next to a bridge. And there was a variety of people using that space, including people who were living there, and that is now kind of gone from that location. It's still a great space to be, but it's missing some of the mystery of it now, I would say, because of the signage, because of the trails, because of the paving and things of that nature.
Yeah. So I think that parlays nicely into a conversation about equity in green space and how, you take a space and you quote unquote improve it. How does that exclude people?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm coming from the position of being a middle class, like white American, right? So a lot of this, I don't want to call it speculation, but it is something that I have learned and not lived. But there are these spaces, and for lack of a better term, many of them are kind of white spaces. So Belle Isle, the Teapot Bridge is less so, I would say, but many of our shining jewel parks are not. They're totally open to anyone from a physical point of view. They're totally open to anyone with the ability to walk anyway, from a physical point of view, but they are not necessarily open to anyone when you think about the kind of social access. They're not necessarily a place of comfort for a lot of, for 50 to 60% of Richmond's population. And I don't know, that's not it's not explicitly intentional anyway, I don't think, but it wouldn't be stated as such. But just the nature of the kinds of things that go on there. If you're walking around Belle Isle and you see all of these, in the summertime, and you see Passages Camp and all of these children of the West End out there, paying $800 a week to be there, that doesn't welcome just anyone.
That appears to be a barrier of some sort.
For sure. Yeah. It's more of a social barrier, not a physical barrier, but it exists nonetheless. But then other things like how accessible is public transport to this location? And in Richmond, we know that public transport is not super, it's free, but to get from place to place, you might have to transfer 2 or 3 times to make it happen. So it becomes less accessible in those ways.
Yeah. So, the first time we talked about this, I mentioned Blue Skies buses.
Yeah.
And how that is a means by which Blue Sky is able to give kids experiences in Richmond that they wouldn't otherwise have access to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I raise that as a point of, to me, that speaks to a deficiency as a barrier access that Blue Sky is bridging. But the question is obvious, like, why does Blue Sky need to bridge that gap? And how can we think about this in a different way that we don't need blue sky to bridge the gap with a bus.
Right.
You know, like
there's so many parts of that, right? There's like the infrastructure in general. Like, so I used to teach at Lucille Brown, which is on the south side on Jank Road, and close to Lucille Brown, relatively close, is Powhite Park. But to walk to Powhite Park, which we could have done, like I did do a few times until I was told that I was endangering students, we were just walking down Jank Road, like, and there's no sidewalk for a lot of that, you know, there's nothing, it's not built for people to actually walk from place to place. Same thing. You know, and there's lots of examples of that throughout the city of zero walkability. When it comes to blue sky in our buses, we do that because sadly, Richmond Public Schools does not have extra buses for field trips. So therefore, we could use their buses, but it would limit the time that we would be able to actually run a field trip. And we feel like it's really important that students get a full, in this case, 3.5 to 4 hours out in the field to get everything we want to get done, and not have to be concerned with the fact that this bus driver can't pick up the kids until they've done all 3 of their runs in the morning, and they have to drop them off so they can do all 3 of the runs in the afternoon. So we just cut out that part, and we own our own buses, and we contract with a local RAF company that doesn't use their buses all winter long. So it works out perfectly. But we have realized that this is a real barrier to us growing past the 12 schools we're currently in, because there is no one else that we can lean on for this kind of support. You know, I'm sure that there are a lot of solutions that I'm not thinking of when it comes to Richmond's transportation woes. Certainly more bus stops, covered bus stops. It would be nice to maybe making the whole bus riding experience a little better. Yeah, you know.
But I think what I think about too is what you were saying about when you were describing, you know, what is urban green space? Like, is it an alley? Is it, you know, it does include these other spaces, and so I think you have to think about how those can become something other than what they currently are, so that they're a benefit. It's not just a place to collect garbage, or, you know, to be a dangerous place. How do you make an alley safe? You know?
And also, but and I want to be careful here, because like I do consider this. I like those spaces. When I lived in the Manchester neighborhood, at that time, it was mostly empty lots where there had been houses, you know, and I kind of loved, you know, picking around in the old foundations of old places. But that is not, I don't want to say that that's a substitute for the actual experience of going to a more immersive natural space. And so I wouldn't want to say, well, oh, it's okay, you know, the East End doesn't really have any parks, but look at all of the empty lots that it has. You know, that's not what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do think that we could do it. I think there's a way to contextualize those places for students such that they could get what they could get from it and still connect it to this other place that they've been taking. Because what I don't want, and what I think happens a lot with environmental education, is you take someone from where they live and you take them to a different place and you say, this is a place that's worth preserving. Unspoken in that is that this place you came from is not as worth preserving. And I there's got to be a way to
bring the two together. Yeah.
I'm totally going to crash this party, but I want to ask you this question. Have you heard of the 1,000 hours outside thing?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, we do that, and it's like you basically try to get your kids to just spend 1,000 hours outside during the summer, and you know, it's like a thing. And I was curious, you know, because you're talking about what this abstraction of a space, what it means. It's like also just go outside.
Just go outside. And that honestly makes me think about the fact that, like, while I'm like, well, I do want for our students to be in their neighborhoods and appreciating the environment of their neighborhoods, the other sad and real truth is that many of our students in the summertime, they're not allowed to go outdoors. Their parents do not want them walking the neighborhoods for very good reasons related to neighborhood violence, you know, and related to whatever else they might get into. But like, so, you know, for many of these, it's not a value judgment. It's just a statement, you know. But the benefits of being outdoors for kids, I have a 7-year-old and you have a couple, and there's all kinds of well-documented physical health, obviously, mental health, but things that, like, I learned recently for younger children, if they don't have time outdoors, then their peripheral vision doesn't develop the way that it should, because especially because for many of them, the alternative is that they're staring at a screen about this far from their face. So it's all this close focus. And so there's no, you know, and so the rates of myopia increase with less time spent outdoors, even things like your hearing and how it develops. It's all, there's so many reasons why it's important to go outdoors.
And I will say my kids are so much happier when they have spent an hour outside versus when they spend all day inside watching TV or whatever. Like the mood and ability to enjoy themselves is night and day.
Right. Yeah, I definitely have taken for granted the fact that when I was their age and I lived in a tiny little town in rural Virginia, it wasn't like be home by this time. It was like, you cannot come home in the summer. It's like, you need to go and I'm going to work and do not show up here before 5 p.m. Go find something to do.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, do you guys remember this? You just ask your mom or dad if you could just go play. Like, hey, can I go play?
Right.
Yeah.
With who?
That was the question.
Yeah. I'd like for that to be the reality. Maybe I'm a little fearful, but we'll see if I'll actually extend that level of freedom to my own child when asked.
It's a different world.
Yeah. So I think you already answered my next question, which was going to be, why it's important for kids and young people to have access outside.
Yeah.
But I guess like to break off from that a little bit, are there specific changes in the city of Richmond that you think would enable a wider range of access for kids, whether that's in their neighborhood or getting to like the James River or something like that?
So there's already some things happening, like the current curriculums leads for science for Richmond are doing a really good job, I think, of trying to match up every school with a community partner that's going to help get their students outdoors. And it doesn't all need to happen in the schools, but the schools are where our kids spend the majority of their time, and in some cases now with these 200-day schools, even more of their time. So it is a good way to access young people. So some of that's happening. I think that on that same vein is that we could be using Richmond could make a different investment in our schoolyards so that they are, because many of them are, sports fields, but most of them are not even being used as they're just there.
It's true.
They're just mowed. That's all.
Exposed areas. Yeah. It's green.
That's green. But green grass from a heat perspective isn't that much. It's only just a little bit better than concrete. And same thing with water runoff. So from an environmental perspective, it would be better if there was a variety of plantings going on there. And you can see some of this, like Lois Harrison Jones Elementary School, which used to be John B. Carey. They have this whole really cool schoolyard, kind of a garden, but also just kind of a space to be. Yeah. Some of it's happening around Pine Camp too. They've got some really cool features there. I would like to see more of that, and more of that just spread around these places, not just associated with the parks themselves, but all these other places that we are talking about, and you see some of that in the Fan, right? Like I think Scuffletown Park is probably a pretty good example of this, I mean, I don't even know the origins of Scuffletown or how it came to be what it is, but it seems like an informal space that maybe got formalized at some point or another.
Yeah. And I think like there's two factors from like an architectural perspective that I think of when you bring up those spaces, and it's the proportion of the outside space with regards to how the buildings frame it, and with regards to it not feeling too tight, like a really skinny alley, but it not feeling so wide that you're in this vast open space and it's exposed. Yeah. And there's trees.
Yeah. Trees is a huge one.
It's huge.
And also just get the right kind of trees. I mean, Richmond's doing much better about it with the arborists currently working, but like, we got to get rid of all these Bradford pears. Yeah. We have to, and then on that same topic, like we really need some more female trees in this city because the pollen and the allergy rates are out of control. So
wait, trees are female?
I'm really terrible with plant biology, but there are fruiting trees and there are pollinating trees, right? And for the most part, cities in general do not plant the fruiting trees because they don't want to deal with the mess. Yeah. So, but then what you get is just a bunch of male trees.
It's a different mess.
Bunch of dudes. And that's a stinky mess. I mean, it's like the engineering school computer lab. Just too many dudes in there.
Right. And nowhere for it to go, basically.
Yeah. No, and I actually saw a short article this morning talking about, I don't even know if this is true, but like different fruit can be male and female.
I guess
like
biology. Most of what I know about biology.
I studied architecture,
yeah.
So
yeah, and I'm an engineer, so we're
unqualified. We're just spouting all kinds of half truths right now, but that is my understanding.
This is what people will take away.
Yeah. Right. We are all qualified here. I also wanted to, if I could just real quick, I'm totally curious about this part you mentioned. There was influence from other countries that are less litigious. And what does that mean, and how does that influence decision making for what you're doing?
Well, I think, so we talk about the importance of young people in the outdoors, but to me, built into that is the importance of unstructured time in the outdoors. Like, we are on a field trip with our students, and it's pretty tight. They're doing one thing, and then they move to the next station, then they move to the next station, then they move to lunch, and then they move back to the bus, and then and they're gone, which is great. And it's a very positive experience just to have, what we were just talking about, like, if kids without adults are out there in these spaces doing whatever, in some cases, depending on what the features are of that space, the city may want to nix it because there's a chance of lawsuits, because this is America and we like to sue. And specifically, I'm talking about this idea of something called an adventure playground, which, if you don't know about, if you look it up, you'll find some really cool stuff. But there's only a few in the United States. There's one on Governor's Island in New York City. Okay. And that one is really neat because it's like, they just have, like, they literally have power tools. There's like pallets,
like real power tools.
They're tarps, like, and students build these enormous structures, and they are, and there are adults, like I say, there's play workers there, but they're basically only there, like, to stop kids from doing the most dangerous thing and to stop kids from fighting. Besides that, they are giving carte blanche.
It's like Minecraft, but real life.
Yeah, exactly. And kids do get hurt.
Yeah.
But they don't get, for the most part, they don't get that hurt.
A nurse on site?
I don't think so, no.
It's
just trusting that
Band-Aids.
Yeah, it's just managed risk. And we are very afraid of our like little porcelain children breaking in some way. But
is this part you mentioned somebody Corin Hewitt, is that part of that?
Corin Hewitt, he's the professor at VCU who got the initial grant to do some of these adventure playgrounds. So we did one in I was involved in getting the students to and kind of ideating a little bit around this. It sounds so ridiculous, but they in Dell Meadow Park, which is part of Dogwood Dell, it was called the Crater. And they just dug a big pit, and they had water in hoses going down into the pit. And then they brought in this artist from a West African nation, which one I can't remember. And he kind of does this kind of semi-functional furniture sculpture using found things. And so he kind of curated these different things that were down in the pit. Yeah. And some kids were building things. Some kids were just making like mud and then jumping in the mud. Some kids were just like taking shovels and just into the, there was all kinds of stuff going on. And Corin's whole thing is that they're wearing GoPros, and then they piece together this documentation of the experience. But he did another one with Lois Harrison Jones kids after school just recently, where they had fires going, and they were burning things, and they were kind of making art, but also some of the kids were just like burn, and again, no one got hurt through the process.
I mean, did they learn how to make fire?
It was like more about what to do. That the fires were there for them. It was really, it's not about outdoor skills. It's really just about doing whatever you want to do in some ways in an outdoor setting.
Yeah, we homeschool, so a lot of times I'll joke around with other kids around, and I'll be like, go ahead and play with fire. And all the parents look at me like, what?
You'll learn once.
It hurts, it hurts, and then you'll stop.
Yeah. I think we could use a little more of that kind of unstructured quality to our experiences in the outdoors. It is a thing where I live quite close to Pony Pasture Park, and so my daughter, for better or for worse, frequently is taking grudge walks with me. Yeah. And she said, well, what are we going to do? We're going to go there. That's what we're going to do. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. We always find something to do. Yeah. Because there's rocks and there's a river and there's stuff, but it is a thing where it's like, oh, we're going kayaking, we're going biking, we're going hiking. We have, and all of those things require skill and knowledge and equipment,
which costs money.
Right. Yeah. So,
yeah. And a lot of these places are pristine, right? Like they require, and it's an important part they require us to take care of them.
Yeah.
Right. But like what is interesting about these other parks that you're talking about is that they're not precious.
No.
Well,
oftentimes they're the place where you're like, feel free to just throw your stuff.
And I find that really interesting as like how can we make those kinds of spaces that aren't precious, that aren't desirable, into something positive and educational,
right,
and life-giving to kids,
right,
like in a way that like sparks creativity and curiosity.
So one thing that I've been playing with anyway, along with this professor from William & Mary named Catherine Lanuette, is how to, because we really, I'm science minded. That's where I come from, is science education. So I like having the science, the kind of the data collection and making meaning of the outdoors through data collection with students. And she showed me some examples of kind of data collection that went on with students where they were mapping. So they would go to a location and they would geotag it, and then they would have their results. And then then the teacher, I think, was using Esri, just using the free ArcGIS basically to like tag these locations and then have their data on there. And so what they were doing was digging little holes and counting the arthropods, counting the invertebrates in the soil basically, and in the schoolyard. And, she was talking about it, and I think it's really true. It's like these kids, they're in the schoolyard all the time. They're playing tag, they're doing whatever, but now they have this, like, they know a secret about this place, and that kind of gives them this extra ownership. So if we were able to, I think, do that with some of these more informal places, and that's what I'd like to do with Blue Sky, is have a more kind of robust, and I say robust, but also like informal space usage where we are, I don't know, taking the temperature or looking at the bugs, because there's stuff there to be looked at. And if it has this space and they walk past this space all the time, but now they know this other thing about this space, like there's, X number of pill bugs per square inch there or something like that. That's just kind of gives them another sense of ownership of that space.
Yeah. And empowerment, that they can take in information around them and do something with it.
Right. And now in Blue Sky's field, a lot of the meetings that I am invited to and a lot of the conferences are focused on climate education. Yeah. And I'm all about climate education. But I think an important part of that is not really that valuable to try to convince someone that they should care about greenhouse gases and the effects on the atmosphere if there is not already somewhat of an inherent like understanding that this is a place that is mine and that I should care about. Yeah. And I hope that I'm not trying to sound reductive about anyone else, because I don't know what anyone else really thinks about the outdoors. This is just from reading and from kind of intuition.
Yeah, no, but I think that goes at the heart of, if you don't value the spaces around you, you're not going to be motivated to keep it or see why it matters if the trees stay or don't stay, or if your garbage goes in the, in the sewer overflow or not.
Right. Like, so when I was this is kind of to me, this is illustrative, and I won't name any names. When I was with RPS, a environmental group wanted to get a grant to do a series of lessons with high schoolers who are in an environmental science class about combined sewage overflow.
Yeah.
And the stormwater issues in Richmond. Yeah. And I brought up in a meeting when we were writing this grant, I said, well, why should they care about this? And their first answer was, well, like for kayaking. And I was like, do you see a lot of RPS students on kayaks right now? And so then we kind of we rewrote the lessons to be more focused on neighborhood flooding, which is very much a reality for all these kids. And I don't know whether that made it more or less impactful or not, but at least to me, it made it more relevant to their lives. And if it's not relevant to your life, why would anyone care about anything?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how many kids in the city of Richmond read Outside Magazine and see that it's a great river city?
Right.
And I think that resonates with me, is like, that is a truth. Yeah. It is a great river city. It is a great place to be on the water.
Right.
Kayak, whatever. That's not how everybody sees it.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So I think for me, like, this conversation is really invigorating, and I get excited about thinking about green space, not just as a park or not just as the James River, but as the spaces between buildings. And I will get you the copy of my book. I've got it in the case right inside my front door.
Awesome.
and it's called The Spaces Between Buildings.
Yeah.
So
easy.
But I think that's a great way to think about green space beyond the literal interpretation of it. And I think there's a lot that you can do with it. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
He owns the book.
Own a book. Yeah. It's called The Space Between Buildings.
I was like, how did that slide by me? And I did not ask that question.
There's an architecture firm in Denmark that does a lot of like urban studies and has written a few books, and one of them is The Space Between Buildings. And so they're architects, but they talk a lot about urban space.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very good, guys. This was fun. I appreciate you letting me listen to it live, and it crashed. I couldn't help myself. I had written down some questions.
Great.
It's good. Yeah, so I appreciate it very much, and we'll see you out there in the green spaces.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Thanks.